Pistol Pete was one of the wildest gangsters from the Bronx. He got his name, Pistol, because he was one of the biggest shooters in New York history. By the time he was 21, Pistol Pete was even rumored to have caught over 30 bodies. Rappers nowadays talk about smoking dead ops, but back in Pistol Pete's time, he was known for holding wet t-shirt contests. A wet t-shirt contest was a term that Pistol Pete used to describe murders, where he would try to shoot his victims enough times to leave their t-shirts soaked in blood. In the 1990s, Pistol Pete made a name for himself as the leader of a violent gang named Sex Money Murder. SMM was created in the Soundview neighborhood in the Bronx. Their signature was to pull up on bikes and spray their ops with Uzis. SMM quickly grew into a large organization that had influence in all 5 boroughs and across the eastern seaboard. Many of your favorite New York rappers, including Nas and 50 Cent, would talk about SMM in their music. 50 Cent has even said that he's going to make a show about them. That's because SMM's influence on New York is undeniable. The gang still operates today, with popular Bronx drill rappers like K-Flock claiming SMM. So, let's get straight into the crazy story of Pistol Pete, a certified savage. Pistol Pete was born Peter Rollack in 1974. He was from the Bronx and grew up in an infamous neighborhood known as Soundview. The Soundview and Castle Hill sections of the Bronx were some of the most dangerous places in New York and were well known for drugs and violence. When Pete was 3, his father left the family, leaving his mother to raise Pete on her own. Pete's father was a hustler and would be in and out of jail for much of Pete's early life. But his father was eventually arrested and sent to prison for 50 years after catching a drug case while working with legendary New York drug kingpin, Nicky Barnes. Pete was a normal kid while he was still attending Catholic school. But after he switched to a public high school, his mother said that she noticed Pete started to change. Despite not having him in his life, Pete would grow up idolizing his father. In public school, he would start mixing with the wrong crowd, and, being the son of a notorious hustler, he felt compelled to live up to his father's name. Pete was very charismatic, and he quickly became a leader. By the age of 17, his mom could no longer handle him, so she sent him to live with his father's friend. However, this only made things worse. His father's friend was also a hustler, and took Pete under his wing, putting him onto the drug game. He would supply Pete with drugs, which Pete would then distribute with his little crew of friends. Pete started Sex Money Murder in 1993. Sex Money Murder sounds like a questionable name for a gang, but there's a backstory to it. Pete didn't invent that name off the top of his head. Sex Money Murder was actually a popular phrase associated with Soundview. For example, people would say, "I'm from Soundview, where it's all about sex, money, and murder." Pete and his crew simply ran with that name. Pete would also start going by a new name, Pistol Pete. SMM quickly developed a reputation as one of the wildest and most violent crews in New York. Their exploits would turn into local legend. They would rob and extort drug dealers and anyone else who had something they wanted. If Pistol Pete wanted your chain, he was going to take it. SMM was also one of the crews that would stick people for their jewels at the legendary Tunnel nightclub. But one story really stands out. Pistol Pete was the type of person who loved the drama. So, if he knew that the stick-up kids were lurking, Pistol Pete would tell all his friends to hand him their chains so he could put them on, daring someone to come try and rob him. He picked up that name, Pistol Pete, because he loved busting his gun. His friends would sometimes have to calm him down because Pete was about to bug out and kill someone on a busy street. The only thing Pistol Pete loved more than sunning people was making money. And he would become a millionaire before he turned 20. Pistol Pete had Soundview on lock and would control the drugs moving in and out of the neighborhood. He also moved drugs out of state, distributing cocaine from New York to places in Pennsylvania and the Carolinas. But one trip to North Carolina would come back to haunt Pistol Pete. Pistol Pete would usually come along on out-of-state trips as an enforcer. His reputation preceded him. People would know not to play games when Pistol Pete was in town. On a routine trip down to North Carolina, one of SMM's customers was causing a problem. He owed Pistol Pete $90,000 for some cocaine, but wasn't able to pay. Pistol Pete wanted to kill him on the spot, but ended up giving him an extra day. The next day, the dealer ghosted him. Pistol Pete got angry and said he was going to go after the dealer's family. But before he could leave the meet, police rushed in and arrested Pistol Pete and his crew. He later found out that the NC dealer he had been working with was actually a long-time police informant. A police canine then searched the van that Pistol Pete came to North Carolina in. The dog indicated there were drugs in the car, but police weren't able to find them. Pistol Pete and his crew installed trap compartments in all the vehicles they used to ship drugs out of state. The police caught on and then impounded the van so they could take it apart and find the trap compartment. They then booked Pistol Pete and his crew. They all gave false names and bonded out. They then went back to New York before the police in NC could figure out who they really were. SMM continued operating in NC, but the next time Pistol Pete would come back was in a prison van. But for the time being, Pistol Pete would forget about the case. He had bigger problems waiting for him back in New York. In the 1990s, SMM would commit dozens of murders across New York in order to maintain control of the streets. In 1994, Pistol Pete would kill a rival drug dealer named Carlton Hines. Hines was another legendary hustler from New York who had one foot in the streets and the other foot on the ball court as a local basketball star with a college scholarship. But there must have been some beef between them after Pistol Pete shot and killed Hines as he was coming out of a stereo shop. Pistol Pete would also hit one of Hines' friends during the shooting, before later finishing the job, fearing that Hines' friend would cooperate in a potential murder case. This didn't stop the police from catching on, and Pistol Pete was arrested a year later for the murder of Carlton Hines and shipped to Rikers Island. While on the island, he was approached by members of the Bloods. The United Blood Nation, or UBN, was formed in Rikers Island 2 years before Pistol Pete got there. The UBN heard about him and wanted Pistol Pete to join. However, Pistol Pete said he wasn't a follower and that he would only join if they let him create his own set under the UBN umbrella. The Bloods agreed, and SMM then became its own set under the UBN umbrella, joining other Blood sets, such as the 9 Trey Gangsters, the same gang that 6ix9ine would later snitch on. Pistol Pete would continue running SMM from behind bars. He eventually managed to make bail and return back to Soundview. Pistol Pete put all of Soundview onto the Blood thing, and soon, the whole neighborhood was painted in red. But 2 weeks after being released, Pistol Pete would return to court, where they would drop the charge for the Carlton Hines murder, citing a lack of witnesses. However, the North Carolina drug case would come back to haunt him. The police in NC had identified the fingerprints submitted during Pistol Pete's prior arrest, and were now bringing a drug case against him. New York authorities then arrested Pistol Pete at the courthouse, and sent him to North Carolina to face those charges. He was only 21 at the time, but it would be the last time Pistol Pete would ever be a free man. Pistol Pete was convicted on federal drug and gun charges, and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Most of his crew had turned on him, and police have also intercepted dozens of jail letters, which they used to show that Pistol Pete was still running SMM while on Rikers Island. Here's the thing though. You would think getting hit with 45 years would spell the end of this story. But Pistol Pete was a different breed. He continued running SMM from behind bars, issuing orders from his jail cell, including orders to murder. But the police wouldn't let this slide. A federal indictment was eventually unsealed back in New York, and Pistol Pete and 10 other members of SMM were hit with the RICO. The feds claiming that SMM was a criminal organization that operated a large drug operation, committed robberies, and did murder for hire. They pinned at least 9 murders to the group, saying that Pistol Pete was ordering people killed from his jail cell. One of the hits he ordered would go down in local history. Pistol Pete was worried that one of his associates would cooperate on the NC drug case. So, he ordered his murder. His associate and another man were then gunned down at a community football game in what came to be known as the Thanksgiving Day murders. Pistol Pete ended up pleading guilty to racketeering in order to avoid a potential death penalty case. In the same courthouse where his father had been sentenced 20 years prior, Pistol Pete would get 3 back-to-back life sentences, plus an additional 105 years, ensuring that he would die in prison. However, the government went further to deny him even the most basic comforts. Since Pistol Pete had a history of running SMM behind bars, the government shipped him to Florence ADX, America's only federal supermax. For the past 20 years, Pistol Pete has been held in solitary confinement, with only his close family and lawyer being able to contact him. After Pistol Pete was convicted for the last time, New York police would go to Soundview and distribute flyers with his face on them and a caption saying, "Don't be next." They knew the power that Pistol Pete had and wanted to stop kids from looking up to him. However, Pistol Pete's legacy in New York is undeniable. He's a street legend and remains idolized by many young kids coming up in the streets of New York today. Even behind the walls of America's biggest jail, Pistol Pete's name continues to ring bells. And that's why he's a certified savage. Please comment, like, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. More certified savages is on the way.